Greetings viewers, I'm George from Ireland. Today I'm going to speak about the defeat of fascism in Italy, which will help those of you who are studying this topic for A-level. So let me see. We'll begin in 1940. The Second World War was already going on. France, the United Kingdom on one side, the Third Reich, that's Germany, on the other. And on the 10th of May, Germany attacked France, the Netherlands and Belgium. Italy was neutral up until this point, though openly sympathetic towards Germany. And then, as things were going very well for the Wehrmacht, Italy at the last moment declared war. They'd massed troops on the southeast frontier of France, invaded that bit of France, bit of the French mainland, and captured Corsica. Italy had a historic claim to Corsica since it had been part of Genoa until 1768. Indeed, the Corsican population speak a dialect of Italian called Corsu. So that was a success for Italy. They'd gained some territory at very little cost to themselves. But the war was not only fought in that theatre. Remember, Libya, Abyssinia, a bit of Somalia, they were all Italian colonies. So was Eritrea. So the British in Sudan, which was an Egyptian-British colony, they attacked Abyssinia straight away. A British explorer called Wilfred Thesiger, he was the first Briton to fire any shots against Italy in this war, just firing across the border from Sudan into Abyssinia, which is now called Ethiopia. So Italy had some early successes, but pretty soon the Allies attacked Abyssinia, a major Italian colony. They were able to attack from Sudan, from British Somaliland, from Kenya, so British, South African, Kenyan, Sudanese, I think even and Indian troops, and pretty soon that was gone. Italian Somaliland was overrun, Eritrea was overrun, so this was a war to gain more territory, and they'd lost. Not a very significant episode in the Second World War, but at least the Allies had actually won something, advanced somewhere, instead of being driven back all the time. Remember, Italy had been fighting since 1935 almost constantly, and Mussolini, he'd prepped this declaration of war. He'd gathered massive crowds in the streets in June 1940, and he declared war live over the radio. And you can watch a video of him at Palazzo Venezia in Rome declaring his irrevocable decision. And he says, the declaration of war, and the most enormous roar of cheering breaks out. People haven't heard who it was against yet, against Great Britain and France. But anyway, pretty soon things turned against Italy within a year of going to war. Italy was in straitened circumstances owing to the hardship of a few years of fighting. Rationing was introduced. Italian factories produced good quality weapons, but nowhere near enough of them. Italian wartime production was pathetic. So in Libya, say 100,000 Italian soldiers could be pushed back by 20,000 British. Seemed like the British are far better soldiers. Not really. The thing is, the British would have fewer soldiers, but a lot more artillery, more tanks, more anti-tank guns, more planes, and that's why they were able to do better, having radar as well. The Italian Navy was the only one which performed quite well, the only branch of their armed services. So quite soon, Germany had to send troops to Libya to prop up the Italians, lest they be completely driven out of Libya as well. And that was a very important theatre of the war for the Italians. They did send a few volunteers to the Eastern Front to fight against the Soviet Union. Italy had invaded Greece in 1940 and got pushed back by the Greeks back into Albania. The Germans had to support them in occupying some of Greece. The Italians were also in Croatia, helping set up the independent state of Croatia. They're bogged down and fighting there. So the Allies, particularly the British, had some Italian exiles living in their countries, and these people were sometimes anti-fascist Italians who could be trained in clandestine warfare, parachuted back into Italy to gather information, try and start a guerrilla campaign. But these were all scotched quite quickly, and they were captured and executed. So despite wartime hardship, support for the regime was fairly solid at first. 1943, the Italians and Germans in North Africa were completely defeated, and Libya was lost. So things were looking bad. Some Italians were growing despondent. The Allied air forces managed to launch bombing raids on mainland Italy. So morale was plummeting, and people were suffering more and more. Casualties were mounting. It seemed like the Allies were going to win. in July 1943, the Allies landed in Sicily, and some of the Italian soldiers surrendered quite quickly. Some of them were Sicilians who didn't consider themselves Italians, or who were anti-fascist, were giving up for that reason, or simply recognised the war had lost. They didn't have much fighting spirit left. So then the Grand Council of Fascism voted, 2/3 of them, that Mussolini must go. Il Duce was being voted out even by his hand-picked henchmen. Mussolini was summoned to meet the king, and the king told him that he was sacked as prime minister. As Mussolini left that meeting, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He was under arrest, and a new prime minister was appointed. It was one of the generals. So that was that, and then Italy declared neutrality in 1943, and then 2 months later, September 1943, declared war on Germany. Now the Germans had seen this coming, and they poured tens of thousands of troops into northern Italy, holding key installations in the north of the country, getting as far south as Rome. In September 1943, the Allied forces had landed on mainland Italy, fighting at Salerno, Anzio, up towards Rome. The thing is, Italy is a very defensible country, being narrow but long and very mountainous. So the Germans did a very good job of holding out for almost 2 years. It's been gradually pushed up, making the Gothic line a defensive line all the way across Italy, about 2/3 of the way up, when they'd eventually been pushed out of Rome. Let me see. As I know, as you said, Mussolini was a prisoner for a while. Then a German paratrooper, Otto Skorzeny, organised a very daring raid where Mussolini was rescued and brought to northern Italy. And there Mussolini set up the Social Republic of Salo. Salo is a town in northern Italy, and a few hardcore fascists were on his side. Most previous fascists had changed sides. So on the anti-fascist side were people who previously been communists, liberals, conservatives, and some of them former fascists who recognised that Mussolini was a loser, the war was a catastrophe, the Allies were winning. Another thing is Mussolini had willingly participated in the Holocaust, sending Italian Jews off to their deaths, knowing precisely what was going to happen. There were more and more atrocities at this time. A lot of Italian civilians deliberately killed by the Wehrmacht, hostages taken. What else? And Mussolini was excusing all this. There were quite a few partisans in northern Italy, as in anti-fascist Italians, who were waging a guerrilla campaign against the fascist fanatics and their German allies. So it was a civil war in northern Italy, but they were gradually pushed out. And by April 1945, there was only a tiny area of northern Italy still under fascist control. But Mussolini was captured by some partisans and executed by firing squad. His body was displayed upside down from a petrol station in Milan. That petrol station, or even that square, doesn't exist, so you can't really locate the site anymore. Now, some people say that the partisans were killing him on the orders of Churchill, because Churchill had tried to negotiate Italian surrender a bit earlier, and Mussolini would have some embarrassing information that would make the British look bad. So that was the end of the Second World War in Italy. The thing is, people talk about an ongoing civil war in Italy through the late 1940s, as former fascists were gradually rehabilitated. The Communist Party became the largest party in Italy, though wasn't in government, and the Christian Democrats were the main anti-communist party. Some of them were former fascists, and there were sometimes assassinations, bombings, right even into the 1980s. And some people say it was a civil war which was not quite in stasis ever since 1943. Political extremism was quite widespread in Italy. So even the Christian Democrats, they had to accept a fascist party into their coalition in the 50s, the only way to maintain government. And Mussolini's remains were passed around and stolen, and eventually he was reburied with some dignity in his hometown of Predappio, and unfortunately it's become a place of pilgrimage for unrepentant fascists to this day. Obviously most Italians are anti-fascists and recognise he was a calamity for their country and a shame, and don't want to go back to that. So it's uncomfortable to recognise that Mussolini was fairly popular in the early years and did have some accomplishments, which is not to trivialise the atrocities which he perpetrated, and there's no question that he knew exactly what he was doing. It was definitely more bad than good. it would show a lack of objectivity and maturity to claim that it did no good whatsoever. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had some popularity.